And thank you so much, Benny, and the organizers for having me. Yes, it is indeed late in London, but very excited to be speaking with you all today. And whilst it's late, I think I'm definitely a night owl, so really good to be speaking to an Asian audience, which is actually very rare for me. So it's really a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the opportunity. So with that, I think I would try and share my screen. Let me see if let me know if you guys can see. Once it's hopefully will come up. Right. I will quickly introduce myself. So I'm a managing director in the center, and I lead our decentralized identity and biometrics practice globally for Accenture, based in the UK, as many of you have heard already. I come from a background, like actually, funny enough, like the doc, I studied philosophy. And philosophy, politics, and economics. So I don't actually come from a very technical background, but over the course of the last 20 plus years, I've learned the technology and especially identity along the way. So coming from a somewhat a business background, as in terms of education, I went off to work for Accenture, doing a lot of work in InfoSec. So spent many years in InfoSec, data privacy, grew up with sort of learning what GDPR and many of the data privacy regulations are like. Over the course of the last 5 years, I've been working closely with the World Economic Forum as the program advisor for all things related to digital identity, and leading one of the projects that we're very excited about, which is the Known Traveler Digital Identity Program, which is before the pandemic, it was the world's first cross-border equivalent of a bit like a digital passport for travel between the government of Netherlands and Canada, KLM Air Canada, and the 3 airports to help people use decentralized ID to cross-border in order to have a seamless way of traveling, and also uses facial recognition. And imagine what it would have been like if we are able to travel today with sharing our identity data, our many forms of identity data in advance, so that we don't have to touch anything. We can get pre-cleared by sharing our data in advance. Wouldn't that be so much better for all of us? Hopefully, the day of that will come soon, with all of the experts here working towards some of that. So my talk today is really around the trends of on SSI, as well as how does that work with identity access management? What does it mean for the two things to be combined? I come from a background of IAM, so very, very familiar with both sides, so to speak. And from the start, our vision is really about, it's not about one versus the other. It's not about identity access management versus a decentralized SSI identity. Our passport, I often say this, our passport never replaced our enterprise ID, nor will it. So, and the two things work in conjunction. We need both things. And it's not about one size fits all. It's about the two things are complementary. And we're very proud to announce today, in conjunction with Drummond and our friends at Avast, as well as Fortrock, that we just launched our intro paper, our thinking, our point of view in terms of how the two things work together, and why the two things need to work together, both SSI and IAM. And I love what the ANISA report said recently, that was published last month, that if SSI is to be adopted, further consideration should be given to the coexistence between existing technologies and SSI. And that, to me, as well as the human side, is really, really the key from a technology aspect. So I think this is critical that we're not all going to rip and replace, nor should technology be rip and replace. Creating standard that works with SSI and existing IAM is critical to adoption for organizations to get it adopted across borders and across industry. So why is this so important? Well, if you think about today, when we get a job, when we open a bank account, this is, the standard examples that SSI folks, all of us identity folks are very familiar with. We need to share our identity data. We give a piece of paper to give it to someone, or hopefully it will be digital soon, and to give it for some organization to verify we are who we say we are. And then thereafter, they issue us with another set of credentials that defines the relationship between the person and that organization, whether that's getting a job. So I use my passport to validate to Accenture that I'm a legitimate to work in the UK. They then issue me with a set of enterprise credentials. I then use both sets of credentials to say, get a mortgage, rent an apartment, so on and so forth, get house insurance, I need proof of employment. So all of those kinds of information are needed across the board. And the result of this today is that we are still in Flintstone times where we still have bits of paper, and it's repetitive, it's costly, it's a pain. Trust me, having lived across the Atlantic in both sides, carrying stacks of paper when you're at the borders is a pain, and they are going to, border control need to ask for those bits of paper. Wouldn't that be so much easier if education organizations, employers can verify without having a human at the end of it to verify the bits of paper? For example, during nighttime, if a flight arrives, the border control folks needs to call my employer to see whether I'm actually really work for them. Well, if with decentralized ID, they don't need to worry whether someone in Accenture is awake to answer that call, or my boss is awake to answer that call that I really work there. And this happens frequently. So think of the new world of technology where all of this has to work together so that it enables a better way of data sharing, where we have greater control of our personal data. We know who we shared it with, how is it shared, and it's less painful. What are some of the trends? Well, we use our mobiles everywhere. Privacy control, I think the doc already touched on this. And this is going to be even more so as we go into the digitally native world. Think of some of the discussions the world is having about the metaverse in a pure digital manner, some of these digital native services. I always say, wouldn't digital identity capabilities be great for online dating? Wouldn't so many of, especially women, I think, wouldn't it be great if I know that the person who's trying to speak to me on an online dating app is actually a real person? Look at the documentary on Netflix right now on Tinder Swindler. Wouldn't it be great if people know that that person has a real bank account? It's not really it's not a fraudster. I mean, people will pay good money for that. I know I would, if I'm on a dating site, to know that that person is real and that person is legit. Similarly, in digital ecosystem, as we look at trade, we look at organizations that need to identify themselves, need to verify themselves, similar to humans, are the same problem, stacks of paper. So that aspects of maintaining control, sharing information, and better digital experiences, greater trust, and are all parts of, I think, as we emerge from the pandemic, better ways of doing things. How can we think of a new future and better way of building a digital ecosystem? And of course, building trust and greater interoperability. I know that many of us working in trust over IP are heavily looking at this area in terms of interoperable digital identities for services that can cross borders and industries, standards to establish and enable this interoperability between existing ecosystem and existing type of systems. Lots of things are going to, in terms of talking about systems like existing systems of IAM protocols and new or, well, perhaps not so new for most of us here with SSI, and how do you combine these together? And these can actually help, I think, in many ways, bridge the digital divide. Most folks are already familiar. Many people who might not even have a huge amount of access may have some access digitally to their employers. How can we help some of these people and enable the employers to help with the digital divide by helping those that have an enterprise capability to extend that to the personal, to the individuals, so that there may be things like custodian functions that we need to think of for SSI world, and how can those two type of capabilities work together? Of course, most importantly, identity needs to create value. This is and use. One of the things that the doc mentioned earlier was around identity needs to be useful to the individual. This is something that we very, very much believe in, that identity needs to be fit for purpose, useful and valued to the individual. Otherwise, no one would use it. The inclusion aspect, security aspect, and ability to provide choice. I think oftentimes we think of trends in SSI as technology. Well, I think the next evolution of SSI is really delivering value. In order for all of this great technology standards to get adopted, people need to use it. We know this stuff works. I think between many of the experts here today, we can make this stuff work. But we need people to use it. We need people to embrace it and make it really happen. And that is about the creators out there of systems, of businesses, to bring value. And I think with that, thinking through how this ecosystem with IAM will work, this private sector, the public sector, all need to work together, whether to make it as simple as things like payments, our degree certificate, our employment, our medical history, driving license, all of those things, those daily activities in life that we use an identity for to bring about value. And with that, the only way that this will really happen to bring about value is for these existing capabilities like SSI and IAM to work together, so that different types of technologies can bring about these capabilities without organizations saying, hey, this is too expensive, we don't want to adopt this, because we already have some IAM system. We have existing PKI system for countries that are related more to borders. Well, wouldn't it be great if all of this can work together so we don't rip and replace and we can continue? Users don't have to know what's behind the scene. They just know that they can share their data securely and privately, and much easier than before without carrying stacks of paper. So imagine Maya goes to a university in our example, and they need a way of proving their identity and verifying their identity. They get a degree attestation from their university. They share this attestation using SSI, and they can then get hired from an employer, and they get an enterprise credential network. All of this they use daily with an existing IAM capability to perform their work function. And later they use this capability to, use Federation to access their benefits portal. This is very much in an ideal world of how the two capabilities can work together, both IAM included and SSI. We use the capability of what I got from an attestation from my employer. I can then go off, Maya can go off and rent an apartment, do other things. And really, not having those bits of paper will make her life, from moving countries to countries, from going to place, making, taking on different contracts, a hell of a lot easier. And thinking through how these capabilities can work together requires skills and knowledge, both from the SSI world as well as the traditional IAM world. And I think as we move forward, there used to be a lot of discussions with Well, is SSI here to take over IAM? And the IAM folks used to think that IAM is here to stay. Federation can do almost everything that SSI can do. Yes and no. Federation has a huge amount of capabilities. A traditional IAM has a huge amount of users. But as I go back to what I said earlier, they haven't replaced the passport. And why not? Well, SSI is there to replace how digitalized the way we use our identity in a digital world. The one many-to-many relationship versus the one-to-many relationship is very, very different. Both are needed. And I think the market is finally coming around to some of this. And here on this slide here, I have tried to simplify the view of how decentralized ID, so SSI, how IDMV works, and how traditional IAM works. We all have a role to play. And the ecosystem is big enough for all parties in the technology domain, in the identity ecosystem domain, to play a role. And it's essential that we come together and play a role. And I think combining the two things together to illustrate the simple point that I make about renting an apartment, having an employee or passport attestation, the rental company can verify this information using the SSI capability. Person can then be issued a set of credentials using an IAM capability for, say, work credentials, my login to my apartment building block to get services. Those things are both needed. So in going forward, bringing the two things together is really around the enablement for the person to be able to share their identity data across entities and to be able to bring an ecosystem much better together. And with that, this is what I think the future could look like. A lot of issuers, whether it's Department of Health, driving license, passports, our benefits, so Department of Labor, this is a fairly sort of public sector focused slide, and thinking through what this data could be used for, whether it's a bank, rental, border, other governments, employers, and then the trust fabric that we already have using SSI or using other capabilities, also thinking through what there is today and building on top of this. We need applications to be built on top of this thinking, to be creative, to build new use cases. I think what the world needs right now is the creativity in use cases. So users can start adopting this technology. And I think a lot of the standards are already out there. The thinking is there, the capability and the technologies is there. But the creativity of use case to help users bring value, adoption, like my example of online dating, I'm sure that online gaming, and probably a lot more that we haven't thought of yet. But those are just two examples. And I'm really heavily advocating for the online dating one because it's useful for me. So other areas that you can all think of, to look at the EU, who's heavily looking at the digital wallet regulations that's coming soon to the EU. I think that's a great initiative. But think of all of the great things that can be done on top of the digital identity wallet capabilities that enable our lives to be a lot simpler, a lot safer, whether online, in the future of the metaverse and beyond. And it's not just for us as individuals, but also on behalf of the businesses and organizations that we run. The EU looks at also digital companies, the identity of companies, the identity of businesses. I have a personal favorite, which is also identity of non-living things, other living things like animals, environmental causes. Think of the world where going beyond what is today. Those are some of the trends that will be coming: identity of companies, identity of things that can leverage the network of SSI and the trust and the privacy preserving aspects of SSI that can bring about a transformation beyond paper, beyond the stacks of bureaucracy that we have to go through to make this much more efficient. So with that, I think the considerations for a new approach to digital identity is think about the adoption, the design with the human, the user at the center, because I think nothing else is more important than serving the value and the use case. aligning with some of the global standards. Ultimately, in order for all of this to become a true ecosystem, that's what standards are for. And that's what the great work that many of our colleagues here today have been working towards. Innovate with the best of breed service providers and vendors. And I think that aspect is the tech is already there. A lot of us can help you with the tech, but help us with adoption, help us with thinking through what are the killer use cases to get everybody using this. And between all of us, we can help to get the technology and continue to innovate in this ecosystem. So thank you very much for having me, and I look forward to the rest of the day.